Imagine an empire that once ruled the world to a weight, now crumbling under its own weight. Imagine a frontier warrior, unknown, underestimated, about to ignite a fire that would burn for centuries. In the year 1302, the mighty Byzantine Empire was fading, and from the ashes of the old world, a new force was rising. Osman, founder of the Ottoman Empire, one final clash, the Battle of Bapheus, would change everything. Today, Explore TV will take you where history comes alive through cinematic storytelling and deep research of Ottoman battle. The year is 1302. Once a colossus of power, art and empire, the Byzantine Empire now teeters on the brink of collapse. From its golden domes in Constantinople to the fractured provinces beyond, the empire is a wounded giant, bleeding from within. Civil wars, political betrayals, and the scars of the Fourth Crusade have hollowed out its strength. Its mosaics still gleam with divine light, but the walls they adorn now protect only shadows. To the east, beyond the fading borders, something new is stirring. From the ashes of the Seljuk Empire, Turkish beyliks, small, war-hardened principalities begin to rise. Among them is one led by a frontier chieftain, Osman, a name whispered in fear and awe across the borderlands. Leading the Kai tribe from the modest town of Sogut, Osman is no ordinary tribal leader. He is a Ghazi, a warrior of the faith who wages relentless raids on Byzantine soil, drawing loyal fighters with promises of honor, plunder, and destiny. Osman is not just raiding, he is building. His campaigns weaken Byzantine control in Bithynia, forcing its terrified people into cities behind crumbling walls. As panic spreads, Emperor Andronikos II can no longer ignore the growing threat. He dispatches a force under George Moussalon, bolstered by Alan mercenaries, to crush Osman's uprising. But what follows is not just another skirmish. On the plains of Bapheus, East meets West in a clash that will echo through centuries. Outnumbered, yet unyielding, Osman's warriors strike with speed and fury, routing the Byzantine forces. The Battle of Bapheus on July 27, 1302, is not merely a military victory, it is the moment a spark becomes flame. From that battlefield rises something far greater than a tribe. A state is born, an empire begins. And as the eagle of Byzantium fades into history, a new symbol rises, the crescent of the Ottomans, sharp as a sword and destined to carve its place across 3 continents. The heart of Anatolia, once the lifeblood of the Byzantine Empire, was now a shattered battlefield. After the Seljuk Sultanate collapsed under Mongol pressure, a violent power vacuum spread across the region. In stormed the Turkmen tribes, fierce nomadic horsemen hardened by desert winds and mountain wars. They brought with them not just swords, but a cause. They were Ghazis, warriors of the faith. To them, every raid on Byzantine soil was not just conquest. It was holy war, raiding for Islam, for honor, and for survival. They carved up Anatolia into beyliks, small warrior states. And from these ashes, one name began to rise above the rest: Osman. From the modest frontier town of Sugut, Osman inherited a humble tribe, but what he built was nothing short of revolutionary. He transformed his territory into a launching pad for a new order. His vision, his charisma, and his mastery of frontier warfare drew Ghazis, allies, and opportunists alike. By the early 1300s, Osman's power began to suffocate Bithynia, the jewel of northwestern Anatolia. Once rich and fertile, supplying the imperial capital with food, Bithynia was now a land surrounded. Osman's forces raided its fields, burned villages, and turned farmlands into war zones. The human cost was catastrophic. Peasants fled their homes in terror. Cities overflowed with refugees. Disease spread, starvation loomed. Loyalty to the Byzantines began to crack, not from ideology but from sheer despair. Bithynia wasn't just being invaded, it was collapsing from within. Back in Constantinople, Emperor Andronikos II could no longer ignore the screams from the provinces. With little money and fewer options, he assembled a desperate force. Veteran soldiers, local militias, and hired Alan mercenaries, foreign warriors from the Caucasus known for their brutal strength. Commanded by George Moussalon, the Byzantine army marched east. Their destination, the plains of Bapheus, where Osman and his Ghazis waited in silence, blades sharpened by prophecy. It would be here, on a quiet field near the Sea of Marmara, that the fate of an empire would be decided. Their raids struck fear into the Byzantine borderlands, changing Anatolia forever. In the marble corridors of Constantinople, Emperor Andronikos II stood at a crossroads. A man of books, not battles, he was haunted by urgent reports from Bithynia, a once thriving province now strangled by relentless Turkish raids. The Ottoman shadow led by Osman was growing. The treasury was nearly empty, the army a hollow echo of former glories. But the pressure could no longer be ignored. With great reluctance, the scholar emperor issued a command that would define an era: march to war. At the head of this desperate gamble stood Georges Moussalon, Grand Commander of the Companions, a battle-tested general with the scars of empire etched into his soul. His army was a patchwork force, hardened regulars, nervous militias, and fierce but unpredictable Alan mercenaries. Caucasian horsemen known as much for ferocity as for chaos. Moussalon knew the truth. This was not a war of banners and sieges. This was guerrilla warfare on foreign soil, where the rules were broken and the enemy fought like phantoms. The Ghazis were not a conventional army. They were a movement, a belief, a tide of warriors who thrived on chaos. Still, duty called. In the summer of 1302, Byzantine banners once again rippled along the Asian shore of the Bosphorus. Citizens watched as the imperial army assembled, perhaps for the last time, on home soil. The long march south to Nicomedia began, but what lay ahead was not conquest, but silence, burned villages, abandoned farms, and eyes always watching from the hills and forests. Osman was not idle. He was waiting. The Ottoman chieftain had drawn the imperial force deep into his lands, using classic step tactics: bleed the enemy through attrition, then strike where it hurts. Osman's army, 5,000 strong, was no longer a loose band of raiders. It was a cohesive, cavalry-led war machine, deadly in its precision. Osman chose the battlefield, the open plain of Bapheus, where speed would triumph over strength and archers would sing death from horseback. By the time Moussalon's weary troops emerged on the plain, it was too late to retreat. They weren't walking into battle, they were walking into a trap. July 27, 1302. The morning sun rose over the plains of Bapheus, casting long shadows across the grassland. Two armies stood face to face, one representing the dying breath of a once great empire, the other the fierce rhythm of a rising frontier force. On one side, Georges Moussalon, veteran general of Byzantium, arranged his troops in a solid, time-honored formation. Seasoned regulars held the center, flanked by local militias. With the fearsome Alan cavalry held in reserve, his strategy relied on discipline, armor, and the order of Roman warfare passed down through generations. Across the field, Osman and his warriors moved like a living current. Lightly armored, fast and fluid, they formed a crescent around the Byzantines. These were Ghazis, fighters of the faith, horse archers who lived on speed, maneuver, and relentless harassment. This was not just a clash of armies, it was a clash of worlds. The signal came, a storm of arrows darkened the sky. Osman's cavalry circled like hawks, loosing volleys from every angle. Byzantine shields thudded under impact, but their flanks, held by untrained militias, began to tremble. The psychological pressure mounted. Moussalon's forces couldn't strike back, only endure. In desperation, Moussalon turned to his final hope, the Alan charge. With a roar, the Alan horsemen burst forward, a hammer aimed at the Turkish lines. They crashed into the Ottoman ranks, but it was a trap. Osman's forces feigned retreat, pulling the Alans deeper into the plain. Once isolated, the trap was sprung. The Turks wheeled around, unleashing a fresh wave of arrows into the now exposed Byzantine flanks. The center couldn't hold. With the Alans gone and the flanks collapsing, the Byzantine shield wall became a death trap. Osman's warriors surrounded them in a tightening noose, firing without mercy. The regulars panicked, the militias broke. The proud imperial army disintegrated into chaos. What followed was not a retreat, it was a rout. Byzantine soldiers threw away their shields and fled for their lives, but Osman's cavalry gave no quarter. They cut down the retreating troops, chasing them for miles. By nightfall, the once mighty Byzantine force lay shattered across the blood-soaked plains. The Battle of Bapheus wasn't just a victory, it was a turning point in history. The myth of Byzantine military dominance was crushed, and in its place a new legend was born, that of Osman, founder of a dynasty that would become an empire. From this field of ruin, the Ottoman Empire began to rise. The disaster at Bapheus struck Constantinople like a physical blow. General Muzalin's return confirmed the empire's worst fears. An entire field army was wiped from existence. The true damage was to the empire's prestige. The defeat showed Byzantium couldn't defend Anatolia. The psychological impact was devastating. The shield of the empire was broken. The defeat triggered a massive wave of refugees. Turkish settlers altered the land's character. For Emperor Andronikos, it was a catastrophe. The loss left him with fewer resources. The government focused on protecting Constantinople. While Constantinople reeled in shock, Osman's camp was a scene of jubilation and triumph. The victory at Bapheus was indeed a watershed moment, elevating him from a locally successful chieftain to a figure of legendary status across the entire Islamic frontier. He had done what no other had managed to do. He had met a formal imperial army in a pitched battle and utterly annihilated it. This singular achievement acted as a powerful magnet, drawing warriors to his banner from all corners of Anatolia and beyond. Ambitious Ghazis, nomadic Turkmen tribes, and even disillusioned Seljuk soldiers saw in Osman a leader blessed by fortune and divine favor, a man destined for greatness. His reputation as the preeminent was now firmly established. The victory provided him with more than just fame. It brought immense material wealth. The spoils from the defeated Byzantine army, armour, weapons, horses, and treasure, were distributed among his followers, reinforcing their loyalty and attracting new recruits with the promise of future riches. The captured soldiers were ransomed or sold, further enriching his coffers. This newfound wealth allowed Osman to build a more permanent and organized military structure, moving beyond a simple tribal coalition towards the foundations of a professional army. He could now afford to retain soldiers and reward his commanders, strengthening the bonds of his nascent state. The victory at Bapheus also served as a powerful ideological statement. In the worldview of the Ghazis, a victory of this magnitude against the forces of the Christian Empire was clear proof of God's blessing. It sanctified Osman's cause, framing his conquests not as mere land grabs, but as a holy mission to expand the domain of Islam. This religious legitimacy was invaluable. It united his diverse followers under a single, powerful purpose and gave his leadership a moral and spiritual authority that other beys, who often fought amongst themselves, lacked. He was no longer just a warlord. He was a champion of the faith, and his state was a state. Following the battle, Osman's political authority grew exponentially. Other smaller Turkish chieftains in the region, recognizing his newfound power and prestige, began to voluntarily submit to his rule, seeking to join a winning cause. He was no longer just the leader of the Kai tribe, he was the undisputed master of northwestern Anatolia. The Battle of Bapheus had effectively cleared the board of his main rival, the Byzantine Empire, and allowed him to consolidate his power without fear of a major military response. The path was now clear for him to focus on his ultimate goal, the capture of the great Byzantine cities of Bithynia. With the Byzantine field army eliminated, the fate of the remaining imperial cities in Bithynia was sealed. Osman's forces, now swollen with new recruits and confident from their victory, could resume their strategy of strangulation without any fear of interruption. The blockades around the major cities of Prusa, Nicaea, and Nicomedia were tightened into inescapable sieges. These cities, once proud centers of Roman and Byzantine civilization, were now isolated outposts, slowly starving as Osman's control over the countryside became absolute. Their walls were strong, but walls cannot hold out forever against hunger and despair. The process of conquest was slow and methodical. Osman did not possess the sophisticated siege engines needed to storm these massive fortifications directly. Instead, he waged a war of attrition. He built smaller forts, or in the surrounding hills from which his warriors could interdict any person or supply convoy attempting to reach the cities. This patient, grinding strategy wore down the defenders' morale and exhausted their resources. One by one, the smaller towns and fortresses that had still held out for the empire surrendered, further isolating the great cities. The Ottoman tide was relentless, slowly rising and submerging everything in its path. The city of Prusa became Osman's primary target. Located in a fertile plain at the foot of the mighty Mount Uludag, it was a prize of immense strategic and symbolic value. The siege of Prusa would last for years, a testament to the city's resilience, but also to Osman's unyielding determination. The long blockade served as a training ground for the nascent Ottoman state, forcing it to develop the administrative and logistical skills necessary to sustain a long-term military operation. This was a crucial transition, moving from a culture of raiding to one of systematic conquest and governance, a key step in the evolution from a beylik to an empire. Although Osman himself would not live to see the final capture of Prusa, he died in 1326, the same year the city finally fell to his son and successor Orhan. The campaign he initiated was a direct consequence of his victory at Bapheus. The battle had given him the freedom to pursue this long-term objective. The subsequent fall of Nicomedia in 1337 and Nicaea in 1331 would complete the Ottoman conquest of Bithynia. The unstoppable tide that began washing over the region on that summer day in 1302 would not recede for over 600 years. The empire had lost its Anatolian shield, and the gateway to Europe was now creaking open. The Battle of Bapheus was far more than a simple military victory. It was the catalyst that transformed Osman's principality from a frontier beylik into a true embryonic state. Before the battle, Osman was one among many ambitious Turkish chieftains. After the battle, he was in a class of his own. The victory provided him with the three essential ingredients for state-building: territory, resources, and, most importantly, legitimacy. By annihilating the Byzantine army, he had created a power vacuum in northwestern Anatolia, which he and his successors were perfectly positioned to fill. The land was now effectively his for the taking. The influx of Ghazi warriors and the spoils of war provided the resources necessary to establish the institutions of a state. Osman began to mint his own coins, a clear declaration of sovereignty. He appointed his own officials, judges or qadis, to administer Islamic law, and governors, known as subasis, to manage conquered territories. This marked a critical shift from a purely military leadership to a rudimentary civil administration. The Ottoman entity was beginning to develop a structure, a bureaucracy, and a legal framework that could govern its expanding domain. It was no longer just a warband, it was becoming a government. The battle's significance lies in its role as a foundational event. It was the first major set-piece battle fought and won by the Ottomans against their primary adversary. This fact was not lost on later Ottoman chroniclers, who portrayed Bapheus as the moment the dynasty truly came into its own. It became a cornerstone of the empire's origin story, a heroic tale of how a small band of faithful warriors, led by a divinely inspired leader, triumphed over the might of a decadent Christian empire. This narrative became a powerful tool for legitimizing the dynasty's rule for centuries to come, cementing Osman's place as the revered founder of the state. Ultimately, the Battle of Bapheus is considered by many historians to be the true birth moment of the Ottoman Empire. While the formal declaration of a sultanate would come later and the capture of Constantinople lay over 150 years in the future, it was this victory that set everything in motion. It established the military and political trajectory that the Ottoman state would follow for the next century. The relentless conquest of Byzantine territory, the absorption of both Christian and Muslim lands, and the gradual expansion from a regional power into a world empire, it all began on that dusty plain where the clash of arms signaled the fall of an old world and the bloody birth of a new one. The Battle of Bapheus wasn't marked by monuments but by a silent shift in power. On that obscure plain, Osman's victory became the first true foundation stone of the Ottoman Empire. Tested against a mighty imperial army, Osman emerged legendary, his name now carrying an aura of destiny. This single day set the momentum and legitimacy for everything that followed, the first step toward an empire that would shape history. The Battle of Bapheus did more than just secure a victory. It established a successful and repeatable blueprint for Ottoman expansion that would be used for generations. The tactics employed by Osman on that day, the fluid encirclement, the relentless arrow storm, the feigned retreat, and the exploitation of enemy impatience, became the hallmark of early Ottoman warfare. It was a military doctrine perfectly suited to the strengths of their light cavalry and the weaknesses of the more static, heavily armoured armies of their European opponents. This tactical superiority would give the Ottomans a decisive edge in their subsequent campaigns in the Balkans and beyond. This blueprint extended beyond the battlefield into the realm of grand strategy. Bapheus demonstrated the effectiveness of a patient war of attrition combined with a decisive strike when the opportunity arose. Osman's initial strategy of slowly strangling the Bithynian cities by controlling the countryside, followed by the annihilation of the relieving army, was a masterclass in strategic thinking. His successors, Orhan, Murad, and Bayezid, would replicate this model time and again. They would isolate Byzantine and Balkan cities, wear down their resistance through blockades, and then defeat any field armies sent to relieve them, slowly and methodically consuming the territory of their adversaries. Furthermore, the battle and its aftermath created a powerful socio-military engine for conquest. The victory attracted a continuous stream of Ghazi warriors, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of expansion. Each new victory brought more spoils and more recruits, which in turn fueled the next campaign. This constant state of warfare on the frontier became central to the identity and economy of the early Ottoman state. The Ghazi ethos, validated so spectacularly at Bapheus, provided the ideological fuel for this engine, uniting a diverse group of followers with a common purpose and a shared belief in the righteousness and profitability of their holy war. This model of conquest proved remarkably adaptable. As the Ottoman state grew and evolved, it incorporated new technologies like siege cannons and new military units like the famed Janissary infantry. However, the core principles established in the early days remained. The emphasis on mobility, psychological warfare, and the strategic isolation of the enemy continued to inform Ottoman military thought for centuries. The pattern of conquest that would eventually carry Ottoman banners to the gates of Vienna had its origins in the tactical and strategic lessons learned and perfected on the battlefield of Bapheus, making it a true template for the creation of an empire. The ultimate legacy of the Battle of Bapheus is written across the map of the world. It is the story of how a minor border skirmish in the grand scheme of 14th century geopolitics set in motion a chain of events that would profoundly alter the balance of power between East and West. The establishment of a dynamic expansionist Turkish state on the doorstep of Europe was a direct consequence of this battle. The Ottoman Empire, born from this victory, would go on to extinguish the last remnants of the Roman Empire, conquer the Balkans, challenge the powers of Christian Europe, and become the dominant force in the Islamic world for half a millennium. The rise of the Ottomans, which began in earnest at Bapheus, would have far-reaching consequences for Europe. It would shift the major trade routes as the old Silk Road terminals came under Ottoman control, arguably spurring the Age of Discovery as European powers sought new sea routes to the east. The constant military pressure on Central Europe, particularly on the Habsburg domains, would be a defining feature of European politics for centuries. The cultural and intellectual exchange, as well as the conflict between the Ottoman and European worlds, would shape the art, science, and identity of both civilizations in ways that still resonate today. For the Middle East and the Islamic world, the legacy was equally transformative. The Ottomans would eventually unite vast swathes of the region under a single ruler, becoming the custodians of the holy cities of Mecca and Medina, and claiming the title of Caliph, the leader of all Sunni Muslims. They brought a period of relative stability and cultural flourishing, known as the Pax Ottomana, to regions that had long been fragmented. The legal, administrative, and architectural traditions established by the Ottoman Empire continue to influence the nations that emerge from its eventual collapse in the early 20th century. It is a humbling thought that so much of this vast historical tapestry can be traced back to a single moment, to the decisions made by two commanders on a summer day in 1302. The Battle of Bapheus stands as a powerful reminder that history often turns on such pivots. It was the point where a potential future, one of continued Byzantine decline or the rise of a different Turkish power, was closed off, and a new one, the Ottoman future, was irrevocably opened. From that dusty plain in Anatolia, a new empire rose, and its shadow would stretch across the centuries, leaving an indelible mark upon the world we inhabit today. As the dust of Bapheus settled, one truth stood tall: empires fall and legends rise. From the shattered pride of Byzantium emerged the spark of a force that would shape centuries. This was more than a battle, it was the birth of an empire. If you enjoyed this journey into the forgotten turning points of history, don't forget to hit that like button. Leave your thoughts in the comments, and most importantly, subscribe to Explore TV for more epic tales of history, empires, and the people who changed the world. New stories every week. Because history isn't just about the past, it's the key to understanding our future. This is Explore TV, where history lives. Thank you for watching. Until next time, explorers, goodbye.